Hello and welcome to Better Work Days, a show dedicated to helping everyday professionals create better days at work. I'm your host, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, where we design and deliver professional development workshops that are relevant, engaging, actionable, and lasting. Each week on Better Work Days, we'll be taking a look at a specific concept, skill, or story that we use in our workshops. We'll make sure that they're easy to understand, fun to learn about, and most importantly, that they can be applied immediately in the workplace as soon as you finish the episode. Thank you for joining us. It's time for Better Work Days from Real Custom Training. This week, we are talking about attitude. Okay, and this is on my brain, it's on my radar, because in a private group workshop today, somebody asked, how can you change an employee's attitude? And that's a great question. It's one that we get a lot, and it's one that is not easy to answer because attitudes are one of the most difficult things to influence in the workplace or influence anywhere in life. They are fully internal, okay? And your employee is coming into your world with attitudes that are deeply seated, have taken a long time to form, are really tied up with their personality and their experience and their way of looking at the world. So if the employee's attitude is not what you want or need it to be, that's a difficult thing to change. There's a whole spectrum of things you can change in your employees or things you can attempt to influence in your employees. And that spectrum on one end is the easy stuff. That's like job skills. You know, someone's not doing something correctly. A little bit of coaching, a little bit of training, you can get them on board. You can change that. How they feel about the task they have to do, that's attitude. That's at the other end of the spectrum, okay? That's second only to personality traits in terms of the most difficult things to influence in your employees. So it's not that it's impossible, but it's that it's not something that can be answered with oh, you need to change their attitude, just do this. No, there's a lot more that needs to follow after that. So in this episode, I want to focus on one aspect of attitude that I do believe managers and leaders can help influence in their employees if the manager and leader first make sure that they emulate and exhibit this attitude themselves. And that is the proactive attitude. So this week, we're going to talk about developing a proactive attitude. And I'm borrowing from one of the great ones, okay? Don't borrow, steal. So let's put it that way. I'm stealing from Stephen Covey and his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You've probably heard of it. It's one of those books in the professional development world that is revered, and there's a ton of hype around it. For me, it was kind of like The Godfather, where I heard about it forever, how great it was. And I don't know if I'm a cynic or what, but when everybody's saying something's great, I naturally think to myself, I bet it's probably not that good. It can't be as good as everyone's saying it is. The Godfather was worthy of all the hype and praise it's ever received, obviously. And 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, similarly, when I finally read it, I said, whoa, I see what everyone's making a big deal about. There's parts in the book that just really spoke to me, and I'll get into a little bit of what resonated with me and why. But it took me a while to get through the book. And that's a good sign with professional development books, because it took me a while because I kept implementing what I was reading. And that means I didn't want to rush through the book. I wanted to take the time to keep working with, one habit at a time, one chapter at a time. And one of the first things that Covey lays out in the book is this concept of proactive attitude. And it really resonated with me, and I was able to implement it, and it ended up contributing to me taking a while to get through the book. But I highly recommend the book. This is one of the key lessons from it, one of the key takeaways, and it's what we're going to look at in this episode of Better Work Days. So what do we mean by proactive attitude, right? It's always important when you're talking about this stuff, get definitions out of the way so that everybody's talking about the same stuff. So proactive attitude, according to Covey, is when you are focused primarily on the things that you can control and the things you can influence. And mainly, as we've talked about before, the only things in life you can control are your own behavior and your own responses to things. The opposite of that is reactive attitude. That's when you're responding to stimulus with absolutely no attempt to exert self-control. Now, if you watched our episode on managing your fear of public speaking, okay, if you didn't, go back and watch it. That's where we first introduced this model of spheres of control. where basically you've got three spheres, okay, one inside of the other. The smallest sphere in the center is things you can control. So, of course, it's the smallest because basically all you can control is your own behavior and responses towards things. Outside of that, a larger circle are the things you can influence. You can't control other people's behavior, but as a manager or leader, you certainly have influence over them. Or as a parent, you've got influence over your kids. Okay. You can't always control them, but you can influence them. And then the largest sphere, stuff you can't control. And when you're reactive, you're mostly focused on the stuff that is in that largest sphere, the stuff you cannot control. And you need to start working on your attitude to focus more on the things you can influence and the things you can control. So Covey's model for how reactive attitudes look when you see them in action is basically you've got a stimulus and then bam, immediately you've got a response to that. One example I use in workshops that resonates with people and they like it is getting cut off in traffic. Okay. That's the stimulus. Somebody cuts you off, whips right in front of you, almost causes an accident. Your response typically in that situation, if you're like me and apparently like a lot of people who take workshops with us, your response is a knee-jerk response. Okay. It's reactive attitude in action. You're not thinking about it. You're just throwing your hands up. You're slamming on the horn. Maybe you're rolling the window down and screaming and swearing at them. I know there's some people in the world, not me, and I hope not you, but there's some people in the world that keep a cup of pennies in the cup holder just to whip those pennies at cars that cut them off. Okay. Don't do that, folks. That's reactive attitude to the extreme. But that's reactive attitude. And it's something a lot of us can relate to. We all probably tend to, flip out a little bit when there's a bad driver in front of us. So how can the proactive attitude, how can that model help you have a different response in those circumstances? So for the proactive attitude model, Covey says, let's put some space between the response and the stimulus. Okay. That car cuts you off. Do not go immediately to the response. Instead, you want to look at what Covey refers to as your freedom to choose. So you've got the stimulus, then in the middle, your freedom to choose, then you can move on to your response. And your freedom to choose is influenced by 4 factors. Number 1 is self-awareness. That's true in this lesson this week. That's true in pretty much everything, every skill set, every mindset we help people develop at Real Custom Training has to start with self-awareness. You cannot change or get better at something if you're not aware of how you already manifest that thing. So in this case, if you want to get better about your attitude and be more proactive, you got to look inward. You got to do some self-reflection and really do an honest inventory of what's my current attitude. Okay. So self-awareness, when that car cuts you off, you can stop yourself and think, I am mad. This is what happens when I get cut off. I get mad, and I want to whip pennies at that car, or I want to shout at him. Okay. Just having that self-awareness, that moment of reflection is important because it pauses you. It pauses you and stops you from immediately going to that response. Covey says, use your imagination, right? That car cut you off. Okay. What if you found out that driver is rushing their pregnant wife to the delivery room? Would you whip pennies at him then? Probably not. I would certainly hope not. What if you found out they cut you off because they're in a fog because a family member died that day? If you can imagine these scenarios that would influence you to have a different response, then why not just pretend one of those scenarios is the reality of it and then have that response anyway? So what if you're wrong? You're saving yourself some bad energy. You're saving yourself some money by not throwing those pennies at them. You're saving someone else from a bad interaction. All right. So if it takes a little bit of imagination to have a better response, roll with it. Pretend it's real. Independent will. Okay. That factors in according to Covey to your freedom to choose. And that's just simply reminding yourself, maybe you can't quite control how mad you get when you get cut off, but you can certainly control whether you got a big old cup of pennies in the cup holder and you're going to throw it at that other car. Okay. You can control that. You can. That's your independent will. You got to remind yourself, I can control my choice here. And then your conscience too, throwing those pennies at that other car. If later that night, you're going to be going to bed thinking, why'd I do that? That's a real jerk thing to do. I got to get this under control. If you know it's going to weigh on your conscience, then again, let that guide you. Okay. If you know you're going to feel bad, it sounds so simple, but if you know you're going to feel bad about it, then pause, reflect on it, and make a different choice that you won't feel bad about. Now, that's the model, okay? And because we're talking about an attitude and how to change it, which, like I said, is really difficult, the first place you can start if you want to change your attitude is you have to start with your thinking, okay? Because our attitudes are internal, you know? Um, I keep going back to, I don't know why. I just love this. I love the throwing pennies example. But if you're whipping pennies at another car that cut you off, that's really reflective of your attitude about being cut off. Okay. So if you want to change the behavior, you got to change the attitude. And that means you got to change how you're thinking about it. So if you want to adopt more of a proactive attitude, you have to adopt more proactive thinking. And Covey has this great chart that I'm going to show you in a moment. And if you're listening, I'll describe it to you. But this great chart that really lays out some examples of reactive thinking and proactive thinking. And this is the part of the book that really hit me like a ton of bricks when I read it. At that time in my career, I was working at an organization that was being consolidated with several others. Authority was being taken away at the local level. It was being centralized. We had new bosses from, out of the local area. And it was a time of high concern and stress with all those changes and really feeling like a loss of control. And when I saw this chart and I looked at, as I'm going to show you now, the list of examples of reactive thinking, I realized, wow, that's really where I live. That's especially with all this stuff going on at work and the consolidation. I'm being incredibly reactive about it. And then he juxtaposes that with this list of proactive thinking. So under reactive, here's an example of reactive thinking. There's nothing I can do about that. Okay. If you catch yourself saying that, there's nothing I can do about it. It's going to be very rare in life that there's literally nothing you can do about a situation. The proactive way to think about it is to say, let's look at alternatives. Reactive, that's just the way I am. Okay. We deal with this a lot because sometimes managers will have somebody who they're trying to coach them and work with them on a certain type of behavior. Let's say that person has a short fuse and they're getting into shouting matches out on the production floor at their company. Okay. And when they get talked to about it, they say, it's just the way I am. I'm sorry. I have a short temper. It's just the way I am. That's very reactive. The proactive way to look at it would be to say, yeah, that is the way I am, but I can choose a different approach. I want to scream at that employee when they messed up. I know that that's the way I am, but I don't have to scream at them. I can choose a different approach. How many times do we say, oh, so-and-so makes me so mad, right? Well, then you can say a more proactive approach. Again, proactive meaning you're focused on what you can control. Covey says, tell yourself, no, I can control my own feelings. Now, I deviate from Covey a little bit here. I don't think it's entirely fair to say you can always control your feelings. I actually think your feelings are more in the influence sphere than the control sphere. Okay. That car cutting you off, it's going to be very difficult to not feel upset when you get cut off. That's a primal thing. All right. When they cut you off for real and almost cause an accident, your fight or flight, your caveman brain's taken over. Like that person almost just caused an accident. They almost just harmed you. They almost just harmed your family if they're in the car. It's really tough to say, no, I can control it. I'm not going to get mad. If at least for a few moments you're going to get mad, don't kid yourself thinking you can control that. Instead, focus on what you can control, which is calming down, not swearing at the other car with the kids in the car seats in the back, which I've been guilty of. Okay. You can control your reaction. You can control your reaction to your feelings. All right. If someone at work says they won't allow that, the bosses, they just won't let us do this thing. Well, no, maybe a more proactive approach is I can try to influence the bosses. I can advocate on behalf of myself and my team. Here's some of the biggest ones. And for managers out there, these are the things that you're either going to recognize yourself saying these, or you may recognize your employee saying these. So let's pretend your employee says, I have to do that. I have to do that. Try to guide them towards a more proactive thinking and remind them that, no, there's not much we all have to do. We all choose to do this. People will say, I have to work. I have to get up and go to work in the morning. I have no choice. No, you do have a choice in that. You chose to get up and go to work. There are incredibly powerful circumstances and influences behind that decision. You got to feed your family, right? But you're still choosing to do it. You ultimately are choosing to do it. And that's really at the core of the proactive attitude, is recognizing that everything you do does boil down to your choice. So even when you're saying, I can't do that, you know, the boss wants you to work on Saturday and you say, I can't, I've got a family event, right? No, you could. You're simply choosing not to, and that's okay. Your choice reflects your priorities. You're choosing to prioritize that family time over the work time. But it's not necessarily fair to say, I can't, simply can't. No, you could. You're just making a different choice. Don't take your own power away by pretending you weren't making choices when you were. No, own them. That was your choice. Sometimes when people say, I have to do this, I must do that, flip it around and say, no, I prefer to do that. I prefer to do it. And if you're worried about, if only so and so would do this, if only other people wouldn't cut me off, I wouldn't keep whipping pennies at their car. No, say, I will not throw pennies at other cars when I get cut off in traffic. Don't even worry about what they can and could or shouldn't or would do. That's not in your sphere of control. What's in your sphere of control is your response to it. You can say, I will make a better response and make a better choice. So this chart right here is the thing that was so helpful to me. And it was helpful to a coworker of mine too. We were under, similar circumstances, feeling really frustrated with things. And so I showed her this and I said, look, I don't know if this would help you. I said, but I recently made this chart from this book. I printed it out and I hung it from my computer monitor to help remind me, no, I've got my own choices to make here. There's a lot of things going on that are outside of my control, but I'm going to be more focused on the stuff I can control. And what ended up happening was I ended up feeling a lot better. I was able to roll with the punches better. And ultimately, I started Real Custom Training because proactively, that became the choice I wanted to make. I didn't want to make the choice to support what was going on in the organization. And I was more excited when I thought about the choices I could make if I started Real Custom Training and started trying to help other people identify things like this that were so helpful to me that hopefully can be helpful to them as well. So what I would encourage you to do, look, I'm going to peel this off my monitor right now. All right. I'll show it to you on the web stream. This is a much fancier version than the original copy of this chart, but this is something I made for people in our workshops. All right. It's a little postcard with this reactive versus proactive thinking chart. And people have told me they do what I did. And I have it to this day taped up to my computer monitor so that every single day, if sales aren't where I want them to be, I don't say, there's nothing I can do. I say, let's look at alternatives. It's a good reminder. There's always something you can do to change the things that you want to change. So I'm going to make this chart available on Facebook. We'll put a graphic up. We'll put it up as a PDF on LinkedIn. So if you want to download this and have a reminder for you as well, like I've done and like some of our customers have done, of reactive thinking versus proactive thinking, if you can get in the habit of changing your thinking so that you're more in line with this proactive thinking side of things, that is how you'll ultimately change your attitude. It has to start with your thinking. Your internal thinking on something is going to reflect, it's going to create your attitude. So if you want to have a more proactive attitude, start trying to think this way. If you listen to this episode and you realize, hey, I have a very proactive attitude, excellent. I would encourage you then, pay attention to when you hear your employees saying things from the left side of this column. Okay. If your employee saying there's nothing I can do about this problem, that's when you exhibit the proactive attitude and you say, I can understand why you feel this way, but let's look at alternatives. Let's look at what you could do. Okay. It can be very challenging for people with a reactive attitude to work with people with a proactive attitude. You've got to do it gently. You've got to guide them towards the proactive attitude. And like anything we recommend at Real Custom Training, what's going to get them on board is when they start getting better results with the proactive attitude than the reactive attitude. So guide them towards it, emulate it for them. And once they start getting better results like you've done, they'll be on board too. And they'll probably start exhibiting more proactive thinking than reactive thinking. So thank you for watching, everybody. Thanks for the feedback on the past couple episodes. For some reason, there was one episode in particular that got a ton of feedback. I guess maybe it's because my adorable 7-year-old daughter was in it. But we did get a lot of good feedback on that. Haley will be back in the future. Rest assured about that. And I'll be back as well every week. We'll be back next Wednesday. If you haven't liked Real Custom Training on Facebook, if you haven't followed us on LinkedIn, please do so. Like and subscribe to this podcast on your podcast app of preference or on YouTube, and let your friends and family and your coworkers and your colleagues and your mailman and everybody in your life know about Better Work Days. We really appreciate the support, and we hope we'll see you again next week. Thanks a lot.